frankly, nobody knows how to make a good movie still. Like we've made, I think, just a little over 2 million movies in the history of mankind. We made 300 million books since the printing press. This is still uncharted territory in a way.
We are feeling creatures who also happen to think.
The directors of old, like all the greats that you can think of, built businesses to make their movies. That's how dedicated they were to this. We made our first frontier film, which is a new category of film. It's not a feature film. It's not a short film. It's not a documentary. The distance, the gap between genius, people that you look up to, and you is so much incredibly smaller than you could ever imagine. We're all immigrants to life. It doesn't matter where you're born. When you become an adult and it's your time to go make your mark in the world, it's like you're just as fresh as anyone else.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. I was very excited for today's recording. My guest is Jason Carman, one of our OSV fellows and just a dynamo Jason, man, like, do you ever sleep? You are the founder of the Story Company. I love your quotes, too. Story inspires science. Science makes story real. But then we're in the golden age of science, but the dark ages of storytelling. Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is more exciting for me just because before founding this company that like I've wanted to found since I was 9, which sounds ridiculous and like a lie, but I swear it's not. I was working on an incredible job I had, and I was really burnt out and tired of making these weekend documentaries. And it was the most serendipitous message from you after a hike with the roommates saying, "Oh, I'm so burnt out of making these documentaries." But it was a message from you and the fellowship that gave me the confidence and the financial support to make the jump to doing this full time. And so quite literally would not be here today if it weren't for that support. So thank you. And it's an honor to talk beyond that, because I've come to really enjoy actually the show quite a bit. And a few people I'm filming with, I go like type in their name on the internet and you're the only one that has interviews with them, which I think is a great sign. It means, talking to rare people. So thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. And let me just add an addendum there. I have every confidence that with or without me, you would be doing what you're doing. We find that people like you are really gracious in your thanks to us, but like you, by hook or by crook, Jason, I think you would be sitting exactly where you're sitting right now. Let's dig into the since you were 9. Steven Spielberg, kind of same story, right? They made a movie about it. It wasn't a very good movie though, unfortunately. But yeah, like Spielberg, same thing. A lot of people that I talked to, like burning desire to do something from when they were a kid. What was it when you were 9? What flipped that switch?
It's a weird, I think I have a full story of it. I think it just takes a few minutes to tell, but I really like the story because I think it properly, honestly shares the events that occurred and the psychology like wrapped in with that, rather than like I watched a movie and I knew that I wanted to be the best filmmaker of all time. It's nothing like that. It's totally, I think it's a funny story and very like, I don't think there's any psychological warping that happens. Essentially, it started originally because of laziness, which is really funny because I don't think laziness is normally a big part of my day-to-day anymore. But basically, in 5th grade, a teacher had a book report that was required. You could either write it, or uniquely, I think the school was trying to be more cutting edge, you can make a video report instead. And I was like, well, that sounds easier than writing a 5-page paper, which is hilariously ironic because every day I write 5 pages now for scripting and things. And I love writing now, but back then I was afraid of it. So I made this video. It was really bad, but there's a moment in the video where I added like a little sound effect, like an MP3, really low quality sound effect of a bomb going off with like a paper mache bomb I made, and it was a prop and it was a whole thing. But I was excited about the magic of like combining 2 different parts of that process and making it, and together they were sort of a stronger whole. And that process just set me off into the interest of making little videos with like the USB flip camcorder recorder. I was lucky enough to go to Italy, I think that summer with my parents. And we took a few family trips when I was a kid, and that was like, I think the highlight one. And I just remember filming everything and like the culture shock of going to Europe as like a kid when you've never been there before, and just you have no idea what the culture is. It's like so many things that like capture your mind and are like incredibly interesting. Like, oh my gosh, why are there so many naked people everywhere in statues? This is like, I remember as a child that was like particularly interesting to me. And I was like, why is this happening? And all of the, yeah, I could go on about that, but it really started off this love for me of just filming things. And then I had an uncle who was a technologist, and he and my dad both sort of put this like imprint on me of like just storytelling being a valuable thing. I mean, my dad would tell me stories going to sleep every night as a little kid, and that was he was sort of like a generative AI back then, and I mean that in the sense of like I don't think he would take offense to this. He wasn't like they weren't these like carefully crafted stories. He was sort of just making it up every next sentence, and to the point where he'd start falling asleep, and then like the stories would start not making sense. And like, Dad, like I don't understand why the like superhero was about to save the woman and then she turned into a crab. And he was like, oh, sorry, I think I fell asleep. And I'm like, it's like, okay. And then my uncle was a big fan of technology and building, a fiber optic network in rural Northern California and was just a big technologist. That's definitely where I think I caught the technology bug at a young age. And he, on the flip side of that, was a big believer in the value of storytelling. And I remember one day I told him that I wanted to kind of maybe try out some green screen stuff. In my family's home desktop computer was not going to cut it at all. Like, I don't think it would even have the ability to stack two video layers on top of each other, the low amount of compute it had. So I go to my uncle, I think I'm 10 or 11, and I'm like, hey, like, how do I do this? And he was like, oh, well, you need to go tell your parents you want a MacBook Pro 13-inch 2012 or 2013 edition. I was like, okay. I went to my parents and they were like, that's a $3,000 computer. You're 10. No. But I think this is the next part that they say is what I think set me on the course I'm on, was that no, but we'll help you save up for it. And so then 2 years of selling lemonade during the summers and mowing lawns and being a janitor in their dental practice, and like over about a year and a half, 2 years of saving money, I had the money for the computer. And then I went and bought it at the Apple Store in Sacramento. And it was just like Christmas for me. It was like this insane feeling. And I think then when I loaded the footage that I shot that week, I learned about the computer and had it sitting on the flip camcorder for 2 years. I think that part might be made up, but I don't, that's how I remember it. But hey, who knows? Loaded in the footage and it just didn't work. Like the green screen footage, it wasn't lit properly. It was not working. And I think in combination with saving up for it for 2 years, wanting to do this thing all the while, and then it not working, sort of set me on this like obsessive, like I want to figure it out path versus like just immediately downloading Minecraft and playing video games and not learning all the CGI visual effects stuff I then went on to learn after, as a result of like the frustration and interest in how do I make this thing work. So I think that weird combination of events is what let me here. And then as time's gone on, I've learned and grown more interest in like the art and the depth of storytelling, in the business side of like, how do you make a new film studio in the 21st century that works and is successful and big. So anyways, but I think that's kind of the initial spark for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn there, right? Because overcoming obstacles is how you get better at a craft. And I mean, it's part of our ancient DNA, I think. See problem, try to figure out. And then you continue to try to figure out, because once you solve the first problem, you get a better problem. And then the better problem is harder. And then you get a much better problem. It's like, the line from Game of Thrones, I change it to failure is a ladder. Because each time you're climbing up that ladder, you're getting better problems, which makes you better. But a lot of people lack that sort of impetus. It's kind of like high agency versus like, oh, I confronted it once. Fuck it, it didn't work. Close the MacBook. I'm gonna play, World of Warcraft or whatever.
Yeah.
And like, to me though, I love that it's almost a set piece, because I was writing in my notes as I was getting ready to chat with you. Like, your origin story is great. You're the plucky underdog becoming the rebel alliance leader against the entrenched antagonists. You have a heroic mission. And
That's kind. I like those words are great, and I love that idea. I think it's perhaps a little grandiose for what my mission is, but I love it nonetheless. So I take it with honor.
The other thing you say, I mean, it's almost like we're quantumly entangled because I think I outlazy you. I think I'm possibly the laziest person that I know
Hmm.
anywhere. And it's like the old German or Prussian general. He was asked, how do you assign, your soldiers? And one of his remarks was, well, if they're lazy and dumb, right to the front, cannon fodder. If they're lazy and clever, I put them at
Hmm.
the top of the highest command.
Yeah.
Because
I you
lazy
know
people find out the easiest way to get anything done, right?
that's something I tell my team all the time is that I think there's like a Bill Gates quote that's similar to how he sort of thought about building Microsoft, this idea of like laziness wins because you're going to find systems and efficient ways to do things. And I tell my team this all the time, like find a lazier way to do it. We have a few incredible people on the team. Um, one guy who is at Pixar for 25 years now, and now he
Wow.
works with us, which is like dream come true. It's like so cool. And I remember like trying to explain this concept of like, you're trying too hard to make it look good. You got to find a lazier way to go about it. And he was like, I think at first he was like, I got to quit. This is not a good place for me to work as an artist. And then I think over time he like realized like, oh, wait, no. The point is that I get to do more art and finding a lazier way to sort of go about this thing. And like lazy kind of like has all this negative baggage with it. But in fact, it can be a great force motivator.
Yeah. And that's interesting. We were chatting before we started the official podcast and talking about you. This is an interesting time for you because you're literally building out a team.
Yeah.
And so, how's that going? What do you look for? Like when I put a team together, I always try to hire people who have cognitive abilities that are very different than my own, or creative
Yeah.
ability that are very different than my own, because I'm loaded with blind spots. We are all loaded with blind spots, and I think one of the better ways is to find that person who isn't, right? And
Yeah.
ooh, you see all the stuff I don't. Will you please work for me or with me? How are you proceeding on that building out of the team?
I spent quite a bit of time thinking about it. And, when I did S3, the docu-series exploring all these deep tech companies, um, deep tech requires a rare level of commitment and work ethic from its employees to build rockets, satellites, and robots that work. I mean, you're working an incredible amount of hours on the weekends with a high potential failure. And so that was kind of my bar going into it, just from immersion of like not being in Hollywood or being like looking at other, jobs where there's like a 9 to 5 expectation or something like this. And so, I mean, I'll caveat everything I'm about to say with like, I don't know, let's check back in a few years or 5 years. So far, I think it's working, but I think number one is we look for people that have exceptional ability in portfolio work because we're mostly hiring people that have worked either adjacent to the industry in film and media creation. And in general, we're looking for like full stack filmmakers, which sounds like a very tech term, but the intention is that you're not just an editor, you're not just a director, you can do multiple things, or you've demonstrated the ability to learn multiple things quickly. And you're not just a part in the team. I think an issue with one of many issues with the Hollywood model today is that people right now are incentivized to they're paid for how long they're staying in a period of production, whether it's development, pre-production, production, post-production, and marketing. They're paid for their time there. So how does that incentivize you to move through that quickly or efficiently at cost? It doesn't. It incentivizes you to stay there and get your hours up. And so, oh no, there's another pre-production delay. Oh no, there's another delay. It's like they're getting paid more. Of course they would do that. It makes sense. And so I think the ability to have, we want people that can work at every stack of that pipeline and have multiple skills is one. The next thing we do is once we've identified them, we're like trying to show them how like this is their dream job. And it's easy for me to believe that because I mean, I've worked at multiple companies and I've been lucky to work at multiple companies that are like were at some point in my career dream jobs for me. However, like I'm a kid that grew up wanting to watch Star Wars and wanted to be a visual effects artist and like make the next Star Wars, And so going to apply for a company that says that they want to do that is exceedingly rare. And especially in such a foundational way where like a conversation at lunch can lead to a new faction in the intergalactic war of the series we're writing, or a new design decision for the architecture of that faction or whatever. And so like it's really easy to sell a company to really talented people based on the idea of like, no. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to build a company that's trying to make the next generation of great sci-fi films. Because that does not, I know it just doesn't come along ever. And so that's easy. Once that's out of the way, we're on to the third thing, which is like, we try to scare people before we hire them. We want them to know how hard it would be to work here. We don't sugarcoat it. We don't try to hide it. We tell them that we have like a SpaceX expectation. Like, at least in the first 5 years of building the company is your life. The odds in that this is an incredibly rare opportunity to work at a place that wants to make freaking sci-fi movies and have that make money and make sense on a business level. It requires a rare level of work ethic too. The original Star Wars was made for 17 million, mostly outside of the Hollywood studio system. And Lucas thought he would do it for 3 million. And I think like if a few things had gone differently, he could have done it even cheaper. And so the capital efficiency story and the story of working exceedingly like incredibly hard to do that is really important. And so we try to scare people and let them know like the expectation is that you're going to work crazy hard. There's basically you're on call at all hours, and that like anything less than that like kind of won't be tolerated, because that's what we require at this stage. One day I don't think we'll be quite that militaristic, but right now I think it's what's required to make this work and make it make sense. There's a balance between what I've learned now after doing this for 8 months is that there's a balance between the SpaceX kind of like burn not all your employees way, and the artists don't work well with that. And it's not to say like, oh, artists are softer than, aerospace engineers. But it's more to say that like the work is a little different. Like if you're trying to create art, there's like things that are similar to engineering. Like you are dealing with, in engineering, your only enemy is the laws of physics. But or not even enemy, but you're a constraint. In art, there are no constraints. So as a result, it's a very different kind of work process to get to something that's really quality. It's not necessarily just about like throw the editor or the engineer at the problem until it's done and like sit on them until it's like done and really burn them out. You can't really do that quite the same way. It's like a different approach. And so that's where it's like we're hiring people that want to do that. Like you cannot make somebody who doesn't want to work crazy hours and do these things we just talked about do that. I don't think. I think you have to already want that. Like that's what I wanted when I was working other places. I think every person we've hired now wants that too. I'm pleased to say that it's like the only thing I've had to do as a manager and a leader in the past 8 months is tell certain employees to like slow down and sleep and actually like save themselves, which I think is a good sign. Another funny little like quirk about our company is that we require every single employee to be an editor, and which is I think unique in that like, Elon has this whole thing of like the factory is the product, not the Tesla, not the rocket, not the car, not the rocket. It's the factory. I similarly believe that is true with editing for film. You could give a great editor bad footage and you can make a great edit. You could not. You could give great footage to a bad editor and you would get a very bad edit. So I think editing is the bottleneck. It's the most impactful part of the process, and it's the part that we've spent the most time investing people and processes and infrastructure into to like really make sure we can grow out more. And we're always looking to hire really incredible editors. They're rare because like it's like, again, we want full stack editors, which means you can do a bunch of things. I think that's most of the hiring process. Yeah, it's really like incredible work ethic, like a rare level of work ethic and commitment. We're not looking for people who want a job. We're looking for people who want to join a cult and build the next Disney, the next Lucasfilm, and who, when we say that, we can tell that they want to do that because they start jittering. And that means they get it. Like it means that I'm just like them. They're just like me. From childhood, we've grown up looking at these movies and be like, oh my God, it'd be an honor to make those movies. And so we're hiring people like that who can learn really fast too. And that's one thing. I'm like, to the one final thing I'll say is like the team we brought on, our foundational team is incredible. I mean, just from the learning rate alone. So like and I can like call out each individual member of the team of like over 6 months. So at the beginning of the 6 months, my lifelong producer and friend, I've been able to hire like three lifelong friends who in middle school, high school, we ran like a little movie making cult, I will say, where we made a bunch of short films, even a feature film. And then we all kind of went to college and said, okay, one day we'll be back together and we'll do this for real. And that's like happening now. One of those people is my producer, and she didn't know Photoshop, didn't even know like how to open it. Or she probably knew that, but like now she designs all of our merchandising and our apparel. And if you look at our apparel, it's incredible. She is the only one that's doing that. There's no AI. It's just her and like incredible work ethic and learning rate. Our composer, also a lifelong friend, didn't know how to edit at all. Now he edits like tens of shorts or vertical videos per month that are going viral and like helping us reach our main target Gen Z audience. Like I could go on about every single member of the team. It has this incredible ability to learn new technical skills to make incredible stuff. And I think that that's really important, especially as like we look to make the next industrial light and magic for ourselves. We look to make the next visual effects company, the next editorial company to make our movies. And so the ability to like have a team that can learn technical processes to make art really well is really important. So yeah, sorry, I hope that's not too long of an answer, but I think it's pretty much all like right now what I'm focused on is like who are the right first 10 people at the company that will, as we scale to 100 people in the future, hopefully it takes a while to do that. I don't want to speed run that. They've set the culture, the tone, and the level of quality of work that we want to see going forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there in what you've just said. Like, I kind of heard Timothy Chalamet in you. I loved his speech. I loved his speech where it's like, you know what? I'm not going to be up here and be humble bragging. I want to be the best.
Yep.
I really aspire to greatness, and I love that aspect of what you're building because you do too. I had the opportunity to meet several of the people that you mentioned, and Star Wars. So I met him. I'm my kids went to school with Ron Howard's kids, and so he would have us over for New Year's Eve every year, and essentially there was always like one surprise guest. And so I find myself sat next to the director, auteur of Star Wars.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there and I'm asking him a bunch of questions because I grew up on Star Wars, right? Like Star Wars was my Matrix. When I still remember standing online and like you could feel the energy just because of the buzz from the movie. But one of the things that amazed me about him was he has an incredibly competitive streak. Like he I would ask him, and I will not name the other directors I asked him about, but like, wow, blunt and like, yeah.
Yeah.
That guy doesn't understand that this is show business. And then he underlines with his hand, business. And, I see that in you too, because I love the fact that you're already talking merchandise, right? Like Lucas, I don't know if it's an apocryphal story or not, but like he nailed it when he made the deal with the movie company. No, you know what? I'll just take the merchandise. I'll just take the merchandise. And of course, that created such a fortune. Another thing that I found interesting as I deal with creatives is that idea that you have to almost create artificial constraints. Like Lucas, 3 million. I can make this for 3 million, right? And it ends up being more. But what if he said, no, I want 100 million or whatever the equivalent back then would have been. Probably wouldn't have get made, right? And so going into it with, here's my minimum viable product, so to speak, to use founder words. I just love that kind of energy and in creative people, because I think your call out on the difference between engineers and creatives is bang on, right? I deal with both, right? We have verticals. All of our verticals are areas that I love and that I think have huge arbitrage opportunities, right? So Infinite Films, why did I do Infinite Films? Because I love movies. And I always have loved movies, and it was pissing me off that like I wasn't seeing any movies that were inspiring. I wasn't seeing any movies that were like, hey, you know what? There's a lot of geniuses in the world. And guess what? We've got this new thing called the internet where we can connect with them. We can find them. That's why we founded the fellowship, right? Like we can find and fund geniuses at a level that was, unthinkable just like 15 years ago. And so what do you think, because like I also grew up watching in reruns, I will admit, but Star Trek, right? And like Star Trek was really, really, at least from my view, kind of an optimistic take on the future. And then I kind of thought about it and I was like, when did sci-fi turn? When did it go from, because early sci-fi was like really optimistic, really optimistic. And then, it seemed to me that between, I don't know, I think the assassination of Kennedy was a big deal. I
Mm,
think because, that speech, we will go to the moon,
yeah.
like that kind of fire energy. And like, meanwhile, the engineers are sitting there going, well,
What?
we don't have any of the tools that we need to get to the moon, but they got so inspired. And then,
Yeah.
of course, him being assassinated. Then you get, the oil embargoes by OPEC and this. By the way, I went from age 10 to 20 in the 1970s, and good and bad, the 70s were like the worst fucking decade of all time, except you got Star Wars, you got a lot of cool stuff, but
Yeah.
then you also had the oil embargo by OPEC that leads to Soylent Green. Soylent
Yeah.
Green is
Yeah.
people. And then it just
Yes.
got so dark, right? 9/11 happens. We get Children of Men. We get all of this, just like, you might as well just kill me now because the future is going to just suck. What are your thoughts? What do you think about how, because I am sensing in your work, in other work, a real turn, and I'm really excited about it. I'm really rooting for it. But what do you think? Is it just part of our natural? I mean, because like we are feeling creatures who also happen to think. We are not
Yeah.
necessarily thinking people or creatures that also happen to feel.
Right.
Emotions have like a 4 million year head start on stories.
Yes.
But stories, I believe, and I want to get your take on this, really have to appeal to emotion, I think. What do you think?
Yeah. They have to, and oh my gosh, there's way too many things to that I'd love to comment and talk about on what you just said. And I think uniquely, so I spent the weekend, like an hour of the weekend, I got away from work and just drove kind of south and re-listened to like one of my favorite interviews with Lucas. Because okay, this is where I'll get spicy. I've been like thinking a lot about like how spicy will I publicly be about some of my opinions on Hollywood, and I've pretty much landed on like, no, I'm going to be fully honest about how I feel. I think I've thought really hard about, for many years, what's wrong with Hollywood? Why are movies worse? Movies take longer, cost more money, and are worse than ever before. Why is that happening? And I think there's sort of two top level answers. The first answer is that, oh, the studio executives are greedy, which I think is a very obvious thing to think. And then the second one, that this one really upset me the most, was the critical response, and the WGA's, or the Writers Guild's, response to CGI and visual effects. And to take a step back here, when I was a kid, after I get the computer and I learned Blender, which is a pretty exciting week to talk about this, because back then in 2011, 2012, Blender was this sort of new open source software. It was about to go through this big UI UX change, Blender 2.7. It was an open source software made in Europe, and it basically was made by some guys who were like, this is ridiculous that all the 3D software costs tens of thousands of dollars per license seat. We should make an open source 3D software that anyone can use to make movies. The industry didn't just say that wasn't possible. They downright laughed at it. It's an incredible week. And so like, I went on to like go and learn Blender, be a huge supporter of it. And I remember even like as a stupid 12-year-old, 13-year-old being like, I'm going to one day make a movie studio that uses only Blender, and revenue and profits from it will support open source plugin development, and like tools we'll build for ourselves. We'll also make open source to support the software that supported me in our journey. And now in five years ago, Blender starts to become like a legit software that more people are using in industry. Originally people just start using it because it's the only free software that can convert between all the file types. That's the reason they're using it. And they start using it, they're like, wait, it's really good actually. And then this week, Blender just won the best animated picture at the Oscars for a open source Blender movie. Like the amount of emotion that gives me, having been an early fan, going from this is a stupid piece of software, it'll never do any real work, to just a decade later winning an Oscar. It gets me incredibly emotional. And to take a step back, again, I wanted to be a CGI visual effects artist. Like that was my first actual job I wanted in the industry. I didn't really want to be a writer director. I was obsessed with like just the art of creating digital images. Fell in love with it. And, you know, Star Wars was like, you know, Lucas built ILM just, you know, 5 miles away from me over here, to make the visual effects for his movie. I was like, I want to work at ILM one day. That's my dream. And around the time I'm doing that, and really interested in this, Life of Pi comes out. And it's this incredible movie about, that story. It's got this tiger in it that looks photoreal. Yeah. It's incredible. The tiger made the movie in a way. And they win best visual effects, as they should, with 11 days of money left in the bank account. The team for that movie, Rhythm and Hughes, relocated 3 times across Canada and the United States to take advantage of tax incentives every time for the studio. And due to the contracting that happened, the studio did not have to pay them the overages, the overtime fees that the visual effects company included, or visual effects company incurred to, make our first ever super realistic tiger. So the film goes on to be pretty damn successful, win Oscars, and then Rhythm and Hughes goes out of business because the studio refused to pay the overages. And now that I'm a business owner running a studio, I can understand the studio's plight a little bit more of like, you made an agreement, this is how long it took you to do it, you didn't do it. On the other hand, all studios are really optimizing for is trying to win Oscars. The amount of money they spend on the Oscar campaigns to do this is insane. So when you have a film that does it, not then respecting and paying back the people that did it, is really tragic. So point being, around that I realized that like, okay, we're living in a very broken ecosystem where that's happening. And then I started to look deeper and I realized that like the visual effects companies have been trying to unionize for a while just so that they could have the simplicity of like, hey, we don't want to uproot our family every few months to take advantage of a 20% tax advantage and incentive to make freaking movies. Like we make movies. Really, we can't figure out how to just have our artists live in the same place and build a family and a community there. And then I realized that there was a specific group of people that were trying to stop visual effects. They weren't supporting visual effects and CGI. They were, in fact, trying to block them from doing unionization. And they were the reason, in my opinion, that movies are bad. And that's the WGA. They 4 times have blocked visual effects from creating their own guild. Every other part of the industry has a guild. Directors, producers, writers, cinematographers. The visual effects and CGI doesn't. And they use this, like, they made up this bullshit lie that the reason movies started getting bad in the 2010s was because of CGI, which is ridiculous. It's not true. And this starts to catch on in like mainstream, and people think like, oh, it's a bad movie because the CGI is bad. First of all, the CGI is rarely bad anymore. And even back then it wasn't. The writing is bad. Like and so anyways, I go on this tangent to think of, to say that like, my general theory now is like, going back to that initial question of like, why do most movies suck today? How do you fix Hollywood? If you could change one thing, like what's the one thing that you do to like increase the quality of movies, and maybe you get to even increase the capital efficiency of movies too at the same time? Like, what's the one lever you turn? Do you unionize CGI visual effects workers? Do you like remove greedy studio executives? Like, what do you do? And for a while, basically what I've landed on is that you need to like whose fault is it? And I pretty squarely landed on it's the fault of directors and writers and producers today, and that we need more writers and directors and producers who treat making a movie like they're building a company rather than making a movie like the directors of old. I'm talking about like not even old really, but like all of them, like all the greats that you can think of, built businesses to make their movies. That's how dedicated they were to this. Like Lucas founded companies, Spielberg founded companies. They did multiple at one time. Kubrick built his own editing facilities and a trailer that could follow him around the sets. They did outlandish things that if like a normal director today would be like, oh, but my latte's not here by 10 a.m. and my like Hollywood man, oh, and like the script's not that good and we need to hire 5 more writers to make it good. Like the quality of the director today in Hollywood has just plummeted compared to what directors of the 20th century were doing to make their freaking movies. And so it's like, I think you have to have a fully verticalized, like my theory is that it's like, you need the director to also be a producer that's own money is on stake, meaning that like, it's my money making the movies I'm making. So I'm very motivated to do it in a capital efficient way. And that limitation of like, I don't have an infinite budget is what makes the movie good. It incentivizes me to want to figure it out. Sometimes you'll run over budget, sometimes you'll be below budget, but like, it's the fact that it's my money on the line too that is motivating me as on that. Like, I'm a big fan of like, make sure that you're like, your value alignment is square, right? Like whether it's an employee or a founder or whoever. And so I'm pretty firmly set that like the reason Hollywood sucks today is that we don't have enough directors and producers that are taking risks in this way. You see it a lot now in the art house community. A24 has done a wonderful job of enabling this, where they're like, blank check, not even a blank check, but like, here's your budget. We're not going to touch how you do it. Versus like, I'm terrified when we go to start making our first real movies of like what Hollywood's going to try to make me do to make our movies. Like, we're gonna be like, okay, great. We've agreed on a $5 or $10 million, dollar production budget for our first like big sci-fi movie. Awesome. And then they're like, oh, well, we want 4 line producers who've made sci-fi movies like that before. They're going to get in there and they're going to tear up my budget. They're going to be like, no, like you can't, there's no way you can do the visual effects for like under 2 million. Like, yes, I can. Like get out of my way and let me do it. And so, this is what I think about the most about. And I think the reason we got here is because we started like, I think in the past 20 years, directors started to like, I think, forget that movies are a new emerging thing and a new sort of technology too, and a new art form. And as a result, started to think about it way too much as a fine art and less of a craft in a kind of like practical art form that requires every art form. You have typography, you have painting, you have music. Film is the ultimate. It's like the masterwork in a sense, because it requires every other art can come into it. And frankly, nobody knows how to make a good movie still. Like, we've made 3 million, or I think just a little over 2 million movies in the history of mankind. We made 300 million books since the printing press. There's not that many good books still today, like great books, like legendary books. There's not that many. Like, why? So, and we barely know how to make, we now are starting to understand, like, how would you write a good book? But like, nobody knows how to actually make a good movie still. Like, this is still uncharted territory in a way. So when I like, for a long time, I started growing up thinking like, oh, I'm bad, or like, I'm not a good director or writer for being so interested in the business side of things, or the financial side of things, or wanting to like build a visual effects company to make my movie. And then it's like, I go back and I listen to the greats, and that's all they're thinking about. It's like the quote of like, when painters get together, they don't talk about paintings, they talk about the cost of turpentine. And like, you listen to these things about these interviews with Lucas, that's all they're talking about. They're talking about budget. They're talking about like schedules. They're talking about like the business logistics side, because they realize like that is the movie. So I don't know, I could go down the tangent of this, but I share that to say like, that's kind of my whole belief at this point, is that like, you have to fully have a vertical, a single entity company person needs to own that film. This model we live in now, where we've made the film business an industry where there's clear jobs and ins and outs for the creatives, is an abomination of what it should be and what it used to be. And it's why movies are going down. It's like, when did sci-fi turn? I think it's like, as much as like what you said, it's a cultural response. But I think it's like, all I would say on that, I think it's a very simple answer, is that It's a hell of a lot easier to make a movie that is scary or negative that feels realistic and feels like that feels real and like a good movie that's scary and negative and pessimistic than the opposite. It is hard as hell to make an optimistic movie or to make one that like properly makes you feel good. And so my opinion is that people that make movies that are negative or like, oh, it's real life and it like looks at these things, that's easy. Real life is very dark and hard. We have a negative bias built into our DNA. It's making Forrest Gump that's nearly impossible. Making a good movie that feels optimistic and doesn't just come off as corny and stupid. It's not natural. It's really hard to do that. And that's the calling of artists. That's the calling of filmmakers, in my opinion. And so like, whenever I see like another art house film or another film that's just negative, I'm just like, it's easy. It's not hard to make a movie that's negative like that. It's hard to make one that is anything but, is sort of my view. And so I think like as the film industry became more of an industry, as we started to delete the lines and borders between us and become more of an interconnected world, we're more exposed to this negative, the reality that can be very negative at times, and movies start to go that direction too. And because movies get easier to make with technology, the barrier to entry is lower. The amount of pain you have to go through to make movies is lower. And as a result, we have directors and writers and creatives that just aren't built like they were used to, aren't the same level of grade and grit that they used to be. Because I think once you go through the grade and grit to make something great, why would you make anything other than like the best you possibly could? So it's a really long, not clear answer, or not clean answer, but I think that's kind of my view and answer to all of it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is so much that like we could talk for another 3 hours just on what you just said, right? Because I completely agree. Another maxim of mine is I look for things to root for as opposed to against.
Yeah.
Because finding things to root against is so fucking easy. I mean,
So
like literally it's just like shooting fish in a barrel. Finding things to root for is a lot harder by making movies like you make, right? Like I'm convinced that the power inherent in making those things to root for in a movie, like it is overwhelming. For example, when the chopsticks caught the ship, like I defy you to find anyone of any political persuasion, unless they're in a death cult somewhere, who did not get the shivers when they saw that happen, right? Yep. How long was that? It was like, if you watch the longer version, it's like 90 seconds.
Well, and so this is the crazy part about this is that, we made our first frontier film, which is a new like category of film. At least that's the way I'm thinking about it. Is it's not a feature film. It's not a short film. It's not a documentary. Like this thing that we're kind of trying to pioneer, this frontier film. Our first one was about space, specifically new space, which I worked in for 2 years. And my whole goal, and I started feeling pretty stupid about this goal by the end of the movie, but now I feel pretty good about it. It was like, when I joined this satellite company that is now just a block away from me, 200,000 square foot, most amazing office in San Francisco, looks like the Avengers HQ. And they're building satellites in an urban city that go to space and provide internet for people super affordably. I didn't know anything about the industry that enabled that, or that this company was a part of. And so I had to read a bunch of books, talk to a bunch of people, and like really do a lot of research and just kind of be in it for 2 years to understand, okay, this is what new space is, what it came from, all this stuff. And so when I set out and then doing S3 a year after that, I realized like, oh, there's like 50 new spaces. There's like 50 different industries and like revolutions that are going on in these industries right now. That is a mix of like new technological enablement, as well as just like problems with like what we're talking about in the film industry, this decrepidation of artistry and quality and business sense, has happened to every industry in the past 20, 30 years. And every industry is trying to have its own little revolution right now. And so I realized like, oh, that's what frontier films need to do. Is I wanted to basically, if anyone was like me 2, 3 years ago when I joined Astronus, what the hell is new space? How many rockets do you launch? It's just all these obvious sort of things once you're in it that aren't obvious if you're not in it. I wanted to make a film for each of these industries that you could just hand to someone and say, hey, it's okay if you know nothing about this thing. By the time you're done with this, you'll understand the basics, what's going on today in the next kind of 10, 20 years, why you should be excited and why you should be excited about it. And so it's kind of made for the lay audience because like that's who we all are before we learn this thing. And I got the coolest piece of feedback on it where there's a friend's, I think parents or like cousins or uncle, aunt, some family relative was living in Texas near SpaceX. And their like relation to SpaceX mentally was like, oh yeah, it's pretty cool. Like we see rockets kind of go up and come down. Don't know what they're doing. Like I hope they're not littering, I guess, was kind of their like view on this. And they sent the film to them. And they watched the film. They canceled their Friday night normal movie night. Or I guess they didn't cancel. They just watched our film instead. And they called their family member after and were like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is happening right next to us. Why didn't nobody tell us? Why didn't we know about this? Like, this is insane. And now they're like the biggest fans of what's going on. And it just made me so emotional and like happy to think like, okay, yes, we did it. Like that's what we want to be able to do with these frontier films. And but point being, like, I say that to say in response to what you're talking about with like, people just don't know why it's a big deal. And I think on the nonfiction side of our business, because like we want to be the best science and technology storytellers so we can be the best science fiction storytellers, and it's a virtuous cycle, I think. To do that, like we just have to tell people. Like, and it's weird because you immerse yourselves in these worlds of like new space to tell these stories. And then by the end of it, you're like kind of repeating this obvious information by you're immersed in it for years. It's like, duh. But like, you have to remember like, no, you didn't know this a few years ago. And that this is like information that the other 8 billion people just don't have and like needs to be packaged in a clear way. And so point being, it's just the information of the story, the basic level of like, here's the story of this rocket and why this thing landing in these Mechazella arms is a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea that is also a very optimistic take, and I share it, which is you can't get mad at people if they don't know
Right.
what's going on. Like we
Right.
have a series that gets interrupted all the time because we're working on so many other things, but we call it the Great Reshuffle, right? Like right now, we are going through the biggest transformation in, I think, maybe all of human history.
Yeah.
And like, I just, every day I wake up thinking, I am so incredibly lucky to be alive at this point in human
Yeah.
history because, like, wow. I
Yeah.
just the more you see, and that's why I got so excited about you and your application and watching your movies, because I love the fact that they do exactly as you said. They introduce, like, there were a lot of your movies, and I've watched most of them. There were a lot of your movies where I like to read about a lot of different things and see a lot of everything. But honestly, you introduced me to like several companies I'd never heard of, and I'm
Cool.
like, holy shit, man, this is like really amazing. What have you? Has there been a bleed through from when you make the movies about the cutting edge companies? Are you taking away principles that you're seeing at that company and building them into your own?
Yes. I mean, the original reason I started doing S3 back then, which is now, we're kind of bringing back S3 in a way, but also like continuing its heritage and the same idea through Frontier Films. Although we have a lot of problems with it that we're trying to fix and we're actively thinking about with it. But the reason I did it originally was just out of personal self-curiosity of like, okay, I never knew that this crazy company Astronis existed. Are there other companies like that? And I think I would like to work on a company like this or build things like this that create great things that give a lot back to humanity and make a better, brighter, abundant future. Who's doing that? Where are they doing that? What can I learn from them? That it was a fully, purely selfish interest when I started the project. And so, yes, I'm doing it now. And I'm doing it for future things I want to build too. And looking at these other companies and thinking like, can I learn vicariously through them? Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of back to the overall goal to make, incredibly great science fiction movies. But first, let's understand like the science.
Yeah. Yeah.
Josh Wolf over at Lux said something to me that really stuck with me. He goes, I love science fiction because it turns into science faction.
Yep.
And the idea, again, going back to what do we want to build? What kind of future do we want? And we all have different takes on that, right? You're young, you want to build your future and the future for your generation, which I love. But me, like I have 6 grandchildren. I want them to live in that world. And I
Yeah.
want to do everything I can
Yeah.
to nudge the world toward that. That's a very arrogant statement, right? But like,
No, I
why
don't. I
not
mean,
try?
that's what it's sad that we have to say that, but I think one of the great principles, like one thing I've been thinking about a lot is like what are the common optimistic sci-fi principles that come from stories like that? That like what changes? Because I'm a new deep science fiction fan. I've been a fan of Star Wars and bits of Star Trek and in like the idea of being in space since I was a little kid, but like I was not a space nerd or buff or geek. I didn't know the difference between Leo and Geo a few years ago. I'm like brand new to it, which is wonderful because I'm able to take this sort of beginner's mind. Like I have the skill of my craft and the ability to make a good image and a film, but like I'm brand new to learning sci-fi and space in a way, like less than 5 years. And one of the principles I'm starting to see that sci-fi uniquely does, much like history, is it gives you the ability to think beyond your lifespan. And that's, I think, one of the most important tenets that we need to get into the heads of people alive today, especially our children, is like, stop thinking about just yourself and the problems you're staring at. Think about the problems of tomorrow and the opportunities of tomorrow. Like people, often criticize like the Mars, people who want to go to Mars and, set up a base there or terraform Mars, and they think it's crazy. But it's like, you forget we built cathedrals over 300 years. Multiple generations of builders built these incredible buildings in Europe. And they were just buildings. Like, we're not even talking about a second home for humanity. Why wouldn't we literally move heaven and earth to make that happen for our children and our children's children and so on? Like, and I think that sci-fi fans immediately, like as soon as you start reading a few of these great sci-fi books, your mind immediately starts thinking like, okay, like I'm not going to live to see this. But like, how we should still do it and still realizing that it's still worth spending the money and the time to do these incredible things for our kids and our kids' kids and so on. And so I think that that's one of the unique things that great sci-fi does. And like, is that like longevity view that it's like, it's beyond yourself, I think.
Yeah. And, that's a really transitive belief as well. Because, for example, my old world of asset management, right? Like the best time horizon you can have is infinite, right? Because then you don't, one of the biggest problems in people trying to manage their money, they all have different goals, but essentially they don't want to be, sleeping rough, right? And they want to have a reasonably good chance to help their kids, their grandkids, et cetera. But what really happens, again, back to we're feeling creatures that also happen to think.
Yeah.
Hyperbolic discounting is like the number one problem with people trying to make decisions, right? It's like
Wow. Yeah.
they only think about like right now. And that is useful in certain domains, right? Like in storytelling or trying to get somebody to take an action immediately. But if you bring hyperbolic discounting to everything, like you're fucked because essentially your world is what you're seeing right now and only today. And if it happens to be awful, right? Like in markets, if it's a down market, then the world's gonna end, and like this is it, this is the big one. And if it's a boom market, I gotta get more of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, but it goes across domains, right? Like if you think about the fullness of time, if you think about like what could possibly be, like most of it's going to certainly happen after I'm dead and gone, after I've shuffled off this mortal coil. But while I'm here, it makes me actually feel good to be focusing on this stuff because like literally if I can make the world like 0.00001% a little better for not only my grandkids, but for everyone's grandkids, for your generation. And the other thing that I like is, especially your generation, like you're just listening to what you said about the great filmmakers of yore, right? Everything is cyclical, right? And so you get these things where you had those people doing those things, then it, as you say, becomes an industry. I'm making air quotes here.
Yeah.
And like then it just kind of goes down, 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 kind of Kafka-esque metamorphosis. But then a whole new group, a whole new generation comes along and it says, "What the actual fuck? Let's
Yeah.
let's reinvent." And so it's kind of like it's reinvention, but it's also a remix. Like you can see, you now have some history. Like when they first invented movie cameras, what did they film? Plays, because they didn't think of any other way to use it, right? And it's easy for us to think, oh, what dummies they were. We do exactly the same stuff, right? Like when a new technology comes along, we find an analog in the past, and
Right.
that's the way we use it.
Like it makes me think of generative AI, right? Like the first thing people are thinking to do is like, oh, we'll replace movies. And it's like, no, you're not. It's not going to work. Like I'm very bearish on the idea of AI technology just replacing filmmakers and movies outright. It took me a while to get there. And I still have like some nights where I'm like, is that true? But like I think it's like we can't imagine like generative media is going to be a totally different thing than interactive media or just normal entertainment media. So I 100% agree with that idea.
Yeah, and like if you think about it as a tool, right?
Yeah.
I generative AI is going to be an amazing tool. It already is an amazing tool. But where people get tripped up, I think, it's like we are going to be over the next 10 years, there's going to be a tsunami of slop. Slop movies, slop writing, slop music, slop fucking everything.
The slot
And
apocalypse.
the slopocalypse.
Yeah.
And what is going to be the thing that is going to make the next gen of the big successes get that success? It's going to be their vision,
Yeah.
their humanity, etc.
Yeah.
So it's like the old saw. AI isn't going to take your job. A human using AI probably will if you don't do it. And it's just like I've been dreaming of AI since I was younger than you are now. I found like I'm a journal keeper, and like I found writing in when I was 22 about like the Alpha Machine Man and Micro Man, and I was like, I can hardly wait.
Yeah. It's
Turned out to
happening.
be
It's
yeah.
happening. It's finally, I mean, yeah, it's so interesting. One thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, like, especially in thinking about this sort of, kind of talking about like hyperbolic discounting or negative bias is, the name of your show, like infinite loops. What are some of the most, what are some of the other interesting ones that you've come across? Like these negative infinite loops, or I guess positive ones that those exist, but like hyperbolic discounting seems like a very clear one. But in doing this show, what are some of the other ones that stick with you, or you immediately some of these common tenets that yeah.
So infinite loops. I'm a huge fan of Douglas Hofstadter, and I was rereading "I Am a Strange Loop," and I'm like, well, I was thinking about it and thinking, well, basically, a lot of lives get screwed up by getting caught in infinite recursive loops. And so, for example, if we are constantly living in the past, if we are constantly obsessing over some event in our life that didn't go the way we wanted it, and we just keep going back to it, you start this negative compounding that then creates a habit that then creates the way you think, and the way you think determines how you act. And so you get in this negative downward loop. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. There can be infinite upward loops too,
Yeah.
right? Like if you start thinking rather about possibilities and ways that we can become better as people, as individual people, as groups, as societies, the world itself. Basically, what you've got to do is talk to smart people like you who are doing incredible things to give people I can start thinking about that. And then if
Yeah.
I'm lucky, they'll start like really thinking about that. And that becomes an upward trajectory for that infinite loop. And try to remind them on the downward, because compounding works both ways, right? And we always talk about, positive compounding. Negative compounding is really a bitch
Yeah.
because if you continue to repeat the same type of behavior that leads to negative results, it's just like literally it's a life destroyer. And so the but we also, the other thing that inspired the name is, if you I'm a huge fan of history, right? And it's like Pearl Jam, to and fro the pendulum throws, right? And we are here and now we're gone. To and fro. And if you just look at these sort of cyclic infinite loops and you just start to dissect them, you see that you can break out of negative ones and you can reinforce positive ones. And the
Mm.
way to do that is to have a completely, I joke to you, it wasn't a joke. This podcast is based on the movie My Dinner with Andre, which was made in 1981. And it's literally two people talking. And I loved that movie when I saw it for the first time. And I got bullied into doing this podcast by a very agentic young guy who worked for me at OSAM. And then I'm like, okay, but here's what you're gonna have to deal with. And so I'm trying to just remind people, give them a peek at, yeah, we all know there's horrible, horrible things going on in the world. Like, that's a given. That's always been a given throughout history. If, however, we were going to like quantify it, we're living at the best possible time in history. Like,
Yeah.
if you understand history, it really sucked for
No,
most
not a
people.
great time.
Not a great time. Really bad, right?
Yeah.
And so like the fact that we get caught in these kind of negative downward loops takes our eyes off the much bigger picture, which is like, if you look and you see those graphs, right? It's because they do the graph wrong, right? They're using an analog graph and they're like, yeah, it just bumps along and it's a line down here and then it goes straight. No, if you did a log graph, you would see that, yes, there are these cycles that can be upward trajectory or downward trajectory,
Yeah.
but we've all got to do our part there, right? Because Rome fell, 1,000 years of darkness. I mean, like, I think about, what if Rome never fell?
Yeah.
Mars would probably already be occupied by
For
human beings.
sure. That's actually a really interesting thought experiment. It's like, there's no reason that we couldn't have had, that the entire industrial revolution and everything that's coming out in the science revolutions couldn't have happened 1,000 years earlier. That's super interesting, actually. Wow.
Yeah, I actually, and I'll probably pitch you on it at some point. I want to make a
Good
movie
idea.
about it, right?
That's a good idea.
I just think, how much fun would it be if we just like one thing changed and all of a sudden we find ourselves living in 2025 and like AI has been around for 150 years and
It's interesting. I know that you're a proud American like me as well, and I think about this question too. Is it's like, what if Rome never fell? And I think we don't even have to wonder that. We get to wonder, like, what if America doesn't fall? And that sounds like a horribly negative question and way to word it, which I kind of say intentionally, because it's like humanity's never had a hyper advanced civilization that is producing so much culture, so much innovation, so much life, survive a long time. And I mean, there's other famous people who like graphs, and have an analytical background, who I think would say that America's done, and it's time for other world powers to kind of take the spot. And I guess I wonder how you think about the future, for even taking a step back from America specifically, but like, just like, like I don't know. I spend so much time talking with people who work in defense or space, and this gets existential very fast, because like small little decisions have big consequences for many billions of people. And it's an incredible time to be alive and a terrible time in some ways. And I wonder how we steward that into making sure Rome doesn't fall.
Yeah, like, first off, I think of America as an idea less than a country.
Yeah, right.
And
Because it can be universal, and it is in many ways, and it should be even more.
it absolutely can be universal.
Right.
And yet we do have this negativity bias. Humans, me, you, I'm not saying they over there
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah, yeah,
negativity.
yeah.
I'm saying all of us. Our human OS has a negativity bias because that makes sense, right? Like in the 98% of evolution where we were wandering around in tribes, like we wanted to novel dangers were really important for us to be able to see quickly and act upon, usually emotionally, right? Terrified, fear, flee, right? But so along comes America at the age of enlightenment. I think we also were lucky when we were formed because the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, the scientific revolution, all of those ideas were percolating in the minds of our founders, right? And
Yeah.
it's easy for us in hindsight to say, well, duh. No, man. At the time, like every country was
Right.
ruled by a king or a queen or a dictator. And that was it. The Hobbesian life is, brutal, nasty, and short, right? And like you were part of the Newtonian machine because science comes in here too, right? We when Newton came out with the Principia, like everybody was like, "Oh, it's a clockwork universe. We can fine tune it. We can predict everything." And then, of course, the quantum guys came along and say, "Hold my beer, guys." Like, no, but at that time, all of these were really new ideas. Like, hey, life, by the way, the original, Jefferson's original was life, liberty, and this pursuit of property, not the
That's so
pursuit
funny.
of happiness,
Huh.
right?
I didn't know that.
And and
Wow.
and so the reason though life, liberty, pursuit of property, happiness, those kind of rights for your average individual were not present. They weren't there. If you weren't like part of the ruling aristocracy, like there were two forms of law, one for them and one for everybody else. And
Right.
so these ideals were absolutely inspiring to thinkers of the era when we were founded. But as you just pointed out, the idea of America is universal. And again, I'm an evidence guy, and like, okay, there's a great book called the Reimagining the Beast about improving capitalism by Howard Bloom.
Yeah.
And basically he's saying, only free markets, if you look at all of the promises made by all of the religions of human history, right? You're going to get to the promised land. Follow me. What will bring you to the promised land?
Yeah.
And then we throw in political religions like communism and socialism, and we'll throw free markets in there too. Which one delivered on those promises?
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
Free markets, free minds, rule of law. The average person is going to be at a level playing field. Now, like people listening might say, oh, well, that's bullshit. There's all of this. Yeah, there are, of course, all of those problems. But if you take that as your given, right, you're like free speech, rule of law, the ability to just do things, right? Like there's a great book by Bill Bryson, America One Summer, and it's about the
Hmm.
1920s. And like literally, we are so new in terms of like back then, people could just do whatever they wanted to. The guy who did Mount Rushmore, he didn't ask anyone's permission. He
Well,
just went and did it.
I think about when they turned on the Chicago pile reactor and they just turned it on under a football stadium and covered it with graphite bricks, and it's like, sorry, what? Like it's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this idea of like agency being some foreign thing, that's what
Yeah.
built America.
That's a
Like if
build
you think
America.
about American DNA too, this is another part of it, I think. right? There's a good book. Well, there's a good book title. The book itself isn't great, but it's called "The Hypomanic Edge: What Built America." And if you think about it, the author makes the argument that, like third, fourth, fifth generation Americans have kind of different DNA than, say, European or Asian societies. And
Mm,
and the point that the author makes is, who came here? You are talking about people who literally left everything they knew, everyone they knew,
yeah.
all of their own history, and said, you know what? I'm getting on that ship. I'm going over there and I'm going to see if I can make my life a spectacular thing.
Yep.
And that is a very different underlying structure than any other country, right? And the other thing about America, it's kind of like St. Paul. He was the best, he memed Christianity into existence, right? Because he was like, people, doesn't matter what gods you got brought up under, like your frog god or your sky god or all that. You don't worry about those. I have the greatest deal in the world for you. There is one God. And it doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, what sex you are, where you were brought up. You can worship this one true God. And in America, we made the same deal. I can't move to Switzerland and become a Swiss person. I can't move to Germany and become a German person. Anybody can move to America and become an American.
Yeah, that's right.
And it is that aspect that is so both incredible, but also fragile, right?
Yeah. It's the immigrant opportunity, right? And I look at like we're all immigrants to life. Like none of us, like what doesn't matter where you're born. It's like when you become an adult and it's your time to go make your mark in the world, it's like you're just as fresh as anyone else. And like that spirit and that opportunity of the ability to create a different and brighter future for yourself, for your family, for other people. If it, like I think that is something that like people in the 20th century seem to have had so much more viscerally. It's so unpopular and rare today. And I think that's why I'm so attracted to it in the deep tech world or in the world of founding or building things, because it's much more common there. It's like these people that are, 20 somethings, 30 somethings. I mean, it's like you said, it's not an age, color, or gender thing. It's really just an agency thing. And that the culture of agency, it's weird to say like it went away, but in some ways it did, in some ways it didn't. But it's so inspiring and motivating.
Yeah, and it's like we are coming out of kind of a managed reality, I think. And I think
Yeah. Wow.
that what's happening now is just for me so exciting because like there's young people like you, and that just like really gets me chuffed. It's
Too
like,
kind.
yeah, it's like holy shit, we can partner with Jason and we can do all this fun stuff, and like then it becomes that infinite upward loop.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so much to be excited about. There's so much to be like really optimistic about. And yet, again, if you study evolutionary psychology and biology, you understand why it's also hard, right? And so I am incredibly optimistic that we can keep this going, that we can, as I see young people like you saying, "Hey, wait a tick, no, I'm not buying into that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this. Like I'm gonna support you. I'm gonna support all of those people because at the end of the day, right? Like critics are like gongs at railway, just banging away. They're just yappers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, well, like, okay, fine. It's really easy. It's a default position. Be that way. I don't really care. As long as there are people like you and other people that we're working with, everyone on the team here at O'Shaughnessy Ventures, I'm gonna remain like incredibly optimistic. Um, Now we're going to change subjects because I loved your PowerPoint date about Dylan. So I too love Dylan. And I watched the movie with some friends last week. not knowing or not connecting the fact that I was gonna, when I was researching and going back through your stuff, that I would see that again. And so first off, it's really funny, and like who was playing your date? Because obviously,
Yeah, she was a paid actress, but she wasn't acting. Well, how do I mean? We basically were like, hey, here's the Tenet one we did. We
yeah,
need you to do this. We're not telling you the movie it's about. Um, we're not giving you lines. There's no second takes. It's just we're paying you to show up and then like, act as you would. You can be positive, negative. We don't care. Just do
yeah,
your thing. Don't. Our only request is like try to be natural and don't force it.
yeah.
And so that's who she was.
Yeah, I liked it because she was good.
She was
She
great. She
was
was
like
hilarious.
she was really funny, and her facial expressions were spot on. Like when you showed the Marlboros.
Just so fun. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's tough. I really want that show to just exist. I really get squirmy about being on camera, and like, I don't think we'll do more episodes of it. The original intention was like, oh, we'll keep doing this because this is a great marketing tool for like our movies.
Yeah,
Is if we create a show like this, but we committed to trying out three total episodes, but I'm too squirmy on it. I don't think I could personally be the one that does it, but I think it's a hell of a show concept and someone should do it. I think it's a lot of fun.
yeah. Well, we're working on several things with you. That might be just another one that we'll add to the list because it's incredibly entertaining, but it also is chock-a-block full with information, which I also
Yeah,
like.
it's kind of fun. Yeah.
I like the movie. I love the. I have a slide about this. Bob Dylan is kind of an asshole.
You agree or disagree?
I agree.
Yeah, for sure. He's
I
absolutely an asshole.
I love Bob Dylan's music. I was brought up. I'm the youngest of six, and by a mile. Like I'm the martini baby. Mom and Dad, thank God, thank you for having those martinis and cigarettes that led to me because there's like 9 years between me and my next youngest sister.
Got it.
But so I had all of these older sisters bossing me around. But the good news was, like, I'm probably one of the few 64-year-old white males who knows the lyrics to every Supreme song because I was hanging out with my sisters. But I also got Bob Dylan and like was listening to it as a little kid
Yeah,
because they were discovering it.
right.
And so it's like, yeah, of course he's an asshole, but like Steve Jobs was kind of an asshole too,
Yeah,
right?
I think all great people are on some degree part of the deal. Part of the
It
deal.
it kind of is. And so I thought it was hysterical. I also liked the movie a lot. I did think that like I love music, and so I know a lot about music history. And that whole that whole they really did kind of cast the folk people as the villains, right?
It was interesting a little bit, yeah, but also I don't know. I also felt like I didn't take away that the folk people were the villains. Like to me, it felt like it still felt like, God damn it, we fought for this folk festival to exist, and we've like climbed this uphill battle, and we're not going to let this like upstart kid who we gave a stage now take it away from us. I totally get it. Like I don't know. To me, it came off as very. I could see both sides of it very clearly and felt.
I try to see both sides, but on the one hand, what I saw was it's a lot like what you said about Hollywood earlier. It starts out as this really cool, fresh new thing. We're gonna
Yeah,
have a music festival that is devoted to folk, which is very Americana. And like we've got Woody Guthrie, we've got Pete Seeger, we've got all these incredible people, and then you get Dylan in there, and like they love Dylan, right? Because he's like a poet.
yeah.
But what worried me as you look at it, whenever something it's like art, right? Do you know why the Impressionists are called the Impressionists?
They're trying to copy the
No,
previous. No, no.
no. The Impressionists got their name from the French Academy of Art, which had become so stultifyingly filled with stasis and no new ideas that they were doing everything they could to tear down the new artists. So
Yes.
they said, this looks like children finger painting. Like, I just have a brief impression of what I want to do. This is horrible stuff, right? And that happens
Good
all the
accent.
time everywhere. The one group like starts out as radicals, right? And then they get in control and they become instantly stasis obsessed. We
Yeah.
are going to keep it this way forever, and this is the best it is. And I
Yep.
saw a hint of that, like with not Seeger. I love Ed Norton as Seeger. What an inspiring choice, by the way.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
because,
So
like,
good.
right? Isn't it right?
I was I was in love. Yeah, 100%.
And anyway, but it was the guy who started the festival. He was turning into the little fascist. No, no electronic music. This is forbidden. And you got Dylan going, "Fuck you, man! Like this is creativity. This is where the world's going. Get
Yeah,
in
that's
the boat
interesting.
or stay on shore."
I think it's interesting to say also, like, side note, you've got to do some voice acting if we ever do an animated film here. Like, this is some impressive range. The um it is interesting because you can think about a totally different way that that could have gone down, where like you totally could have had like the festival guy get up and be like, okay, everybody, we have Bob Dylan. He's gonna play some different music tonight.
Hmm.
And like you could have prefaced it a little bit. And like if the concern was like, oh, it's not folk, it's like you have 3 days of folk or 2 days of it. It's like, yeah, I do agree. I think it could have been the festival could have handled it totally differently.
But
It's interesting.
but here's the thing. I think that kind of look. If I have any political philosophy, it is only I am fiercely anti-authoritarian.
Yeah,
I just like they make my skin crawl. And
yeah,
and because like no, this is the way it is. This is the way it will always be. It's never going to change. It's perfect. And like it's the enemy of everything that I'm about, right? And the thing that I thought was really interesting was yes, they could have done that. Yes, they could have gotten up and said, "Hey, Bob Dylan, who we love, by the way, has some new music. A lot of you might not like it. You might not think it really fits into our genre, but hey, give it a shot." Like
right.
that would have gone really, really differently. But it's that authoritarian nature
Yeah.
prevents them from doing that.
Yeah.
It is like the scene where he goes and shows up at the public TV, right? And he's playing with this blues and jazz legend, and like Pete Seeger, I thought that scene actually informed Seeger's character better. Like a little worried, like ooh, but okay. And then what does he do? He picks up his banjo and joins him, right?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of that opening scene, which I think for young people was such like a jaw-dropping scene when you meet Pete Seeger, who's like the sweetest like bear of a character.
Yeah.
Um, he's in court for a song that is like, oh, it's a bad song. And he starts playing like what we today like. I think I was like my like I think my jaw dropped when I heard like this land is my land. This thing. It was like
Exactly.
what? This was a song we were worried about, and then but my God, that's like the beauty of history is then to go and like learn the story of that song and like why it was treated like that. It's like so fascinating.
Yeah. And again, it's the story within the story, right? Because it was the status quo, like communism is bad,
Yeah,
implying that this land is everyone's. What are you, a
yeah,
commie? That wasn't
yeah.
that
Right,
wasn't what the song was about. But when you
right.
start seeing things through a unilens, right? The unilens that everyone was looking through back then was must defeat communism, USSR bad. And well, that's true. They took it to these crazy extremes, right? And like we can't have people singing songs about this land being their land. No, this land is our land. It reminded
Right.
me of the joke that well, it wasn't a joke. It was J. Paul Getty, the famously awful human being who did very, very well in the oil business, once said that, hey, the meek might inherit the earth, but not necessarily its mineral rights.
It's a hell of a quote, actually. Wow. And there's so many. There's another project. There's a project we should definitely talk about offline sometime. But there's so many incredible biopics that have not been made.
Oh,
So many.
I so many. Like you could devote we could if we did made nothing else at Infinite Films, we could probably do incredibly well with just a bunch of biopics.
I have an idea. Yeah, we should. I have an idea about this. We should talk about sometime.
Let's do that offline though, because we don't want to give away all our secrets.
No,
All
no, no
right.
secrets.
I'm going to shift gears again because we
It's so
also
fun.
seem to really like the same movies. Like I
Yeah,
love Tenet, and everybody,
I mean, it is not a popular movie.
oh man, like when I said that I loved it, people would just look at me like I had three heads.
Yeah,
And the whole Sator palindrome,
yeah,
like that alone
so
is
cool,
it's just so cool.
so
And
neat.
like he made an entire movie around it and it
So
worked
it's
and he
cool.
actually pulled it off.
We would say that many wouldn't, but I would full-heartedly agree. Probably more than most. Yeah,
But again, this is kind of like the hey, show people, don't tell, right?
yeah,
Like I don't expect people just to know about the Sator palindrome and you know that they found it in Pompeii in what like 78 or 79 AD.
yeah.
And but like I love stuff like that.
Well, so
And
so I gotta ask you, like, before we go into Tenet, what do you think? You are far greater of a historian and like knowledgeable person about this sort of thing. What is the Seder Square from your understanding? Like, why did it exist? Like, what was it for? Like, there is, as far as I can tell, just zero understanding as what that thing was back then, or like what was it?
so okay, like I have to adjust my woo setting here, right? So I've got to turn my woo all the way up if you want a really wild, crazy answer,
Okay,
or turn my woo all the way down if you
can we
want.
get both? Like, can we just
Yeah, well, let's do both.
let's start with the
So,
start with the low woo.
so let's go low woo. Satyr Rhodus creates, if you look at it, Satyr Rhodus goes backwards and forwards. It creates what? An
Palindrome.
infinite
Oh,
loop.
yeah, there you go.
It creates an infinite loop because when you can read it anyway, you can read it up, down, across, diagonally,
Yep.
like it still implies the same thing. So I think honestly, if we apply Occam's razor, some very clever person was just kind of like fucking around and
Yeah.
they're like, oh,
Neat.
look at what happened.
Cool.
This
Yeah.
is neat. And then it's kind of like, you know, I find it very interesting that the founders of two of the biggest religions of today, Siddhartha, Buddhism, Jesus Christ, Christianity, neither of those guys ever wrote anything down, ever. And so, why is that
Hmm.
interesting? A
There.
bit like this, and you'll see I'm coming at this in a really circuitous way, so you got to bear with me.
No, I love it.
So Jesus never wrote anything down. Siddhartha never wrote anything down. And yet, like the texts from Buddhism, you know, the however many noble truths and the 15 zillion different paths and all this stuff, they were the guys and women trying to figure out what the fuck was Siddhartha going on about.
Yeah.
Right. And then same with Christ. Like Christ was not a Christian. Siddhartha was not a Buddhist. So what happens is somebody clever for whatever reason, like in this case, I'm not saying that this is religious in any way, but if you want to go the religion route, there's a hidden anagram, Pater Nostris, our Father. Christianity was just kind of getting its legs there when this first one was found in like 79 AD. The Romans weren't having it. And yet they were very taken with the way it worked out, right? And so it became a puzzle. And so people began basically putting their own belief structures on on the Sator palindrome, on the Sator square, right? And so like if you take the simplest explanation, somebody clever just came up with, and he was like, "Oh, that's cool," and he carved it in the thing, and then it just started showing up everywhere. Because again, what's one of our basic human instincts is we love to solve things, right? Our brains are prediction machines, basically. Like large language models predicting the next
Yeah.
token.
Yeah. It's
Hello,
almost,
we've got
it's
one of
almost
those right here.
us. Yep.
And that's what we do. Now, if you want to turn all the woo all the way up, it was an ancient civilization that was spacefaring. It was the ability, it was the coordinates to how to make sure that Earth remains intact and that doesn't need any patches. Like I have 20 pages on what this might be. I should have reviewed them before our
Whoa.
conversation. But like and if you want to have real fun, just like go into your favorite large language model. Now, we have our own AI in house here because we want the unlobotomized version of all these large language models. And so I'll send you some of them
Yeah. I'd love to.
because
That is fascinating. Yeah.
it gets really crazy really fast. And
Oh,
I always have to say, now get rid of any humility, and I want you to make outlandish, wild speculations.
yeah.
And they always end up in the sphere of quantum entanglement or
Yeah.
like consciousness, and these are the
It's the limit. It's what
coordinates.
that's our new limit of what we don't know right now as a
Exactly.
species. Like I mean, I would love to read that. It's really interesting too, as we sort of start to push up against, there's like XAI, which is and Claude too from Anthropic, seemingly the two AI labs that are the most interested in using AI to now crack new bounds of knowledge. And it's like large language models too are just going to be limited until we can start doing that. And things will get very interesting as we start to be able to go beyond what like the local maximum of knowledge is.
Well, absolutely. That's why, like, I mean, jobs again, computers are bicycles for the mind. AI, large language models are rocket ships for the mind.
Yeah.
They are giving your average human more leverage than entire societies could ever throw at a problem. And if you understand the leverage inherent in I mean, this is Promethean fire.
Yeah, it's
And
insane. I mean, it's like intelligence
why
is
it scares a
commoditized
lot of people too, right?
for sure.
So, let's get back to movies
Yeah, back
because
to Tenet.
you are so good at making them. David Fincher said movies aren't finished, they're abandoned.
Huh.
Like, how do you know? What is it? Is it an emotional thing? Is it a logical thing? How do you know? Like, okay, it's done.
I used to think that quote, because I think Spielberg had a similar one. I used to think that quote was like dumb and was like, no, it's a skill issue. Movies can totally be finished. Now I do not believe that. And I fully believe that quote. It's a really hard, yeah. I mean, I'm dealing with it right now when I'm in like post-production hell on the first short film I've done in 6 years. Our first fiction project as a company. It's called Planet. It's a little ambitious, and we're struggling with it now. But like that's good. I think it means we picked a good idea that we're struggling with. And um, my view is like I'm a very like learning growth mindset person. And like my God, what we've learned from Planet is just already insane. And like I can't wait to go and tackle the first fiction feature film here in a few months as a result of all the learning. But I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I mean, I'm a big deadline oriented person.
Mm.
Like get a draft done, iterate it. Like I believe iteration is kind of the key. I think what I learned with Planet is that the iteration should have happened more on the script stage rather than the story was really developed for the movie for over like a year, but the script was rushed. And so as a result, 2 weeks before production, we wrote in extra scenes so that we could like have more optionality in editing, which is great. We have the optionality. The issue is just the optionality. So
Right.
this is a really good learning. And like a director I'm really inspired by who I think is, well, I was about to say like does this really well is Denis Villeneuve.
Mm.
For Dune. He
Yeah.
just so meticulously plans everything. But then I learned, I guess there's like another hour and a half of Dune 2 that just they shot and didn't use. And so I'm like, oh, never mind. This is clearly like, clearly this is something that everyone's dealing with, is like the inefficiency of making a movie sometimes. But I think my view is that um, the one lever you get to control as a builder of any kind is speed.
Mm.
Um, Quality is a function of skill and iteration, or just skill. Like if you have skill, you can, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years of expertise. The skill output from a single brushstroke or work output is going to be higher. And then if you don't have that, it's iteration loops, infinite iteration loops, and knowing, um, knowing, I guess where to. I think other than that, something that's like you can run through your iteration loops faster, I guess is my whole theory. Like I often like kind of push on my team to like work faster. And I think often in the industry, there's like a negative association with speed. In art, it's like, well, speed is bad. It's like, no, it's not. It lets you actually get more quality because you get more passes at it. And so I think that's my view is like try to cram in as much iteration as you can. So I don't have a good answer for this yet because it's like I haven't completed a fiction film in 6 years.
Mm.
And none of the ones I completed back then I'm very proud of. So I guess like it'd be fun to talk about this again in 2 years. In 2 years, we'll have short film done, two films that we'll attempt to like win Oscars with or get nominated for. And then hopefully we're well into production of the first trilogy film. So I'll have more data then. Until then, it's like hard for me to say. Like I think I do think it's interesting. I do believe. Oh, one other thing I will say is that I believe in imperfection. Like I think like embracing imperfection strategically is like a really important part of the film process. And that like an overly engineered image, an overly perfected image isn't cinema. Cinema
Mm.
embraces imperfection, and like that's where it gives it its character. It's the cut of the diamond, the quality of it too. And like better doesn't always mean better. And so I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. And it's funny because as I was listening to you, it brought me back to us talking about the reaction of the folk festival. Like ideas that are strong don't need a lot of no, you can't talk about that. No, you can't talk about no, you can't play that kind of music
Agreed.
because that's not allowed. It's like what there's a great quote from Jed McKenna, which is if somebody's having a little tea party with Lord Lion and Lady Gazelle, and someone else comes along who questions their fantasy narrative, it isn't that they're being mean, it's that your fantasy narrative is a little fragile.
Yeah,
And so, like, the fragility of the folk festival was like it was too fragile. If
yeah,
it was not fragile, they'd be, yeah, do it, Dylan. Show us this new stuff. We love it.
it's a great point.
And that's why I like anytime I come up against somebody who's like, no, we cannot talk about that. I know that they're trying to defend an
There's something.
incredibly
Yeah,
fragile
yeah,
idea that's
yes.
probably incredibly wrong.
That's been a big part of my learning. I think the past 8 months is like attacking my own fragility, and I think all artists have it to some extent. And I think it's like something that engineers don't like really good engineers or builders don't have as much as they like are a champion of the best idea. And I think that's been a really interesting thing for me to unlearn for sure is like um being willing to attack my own fragility and like look at ideas as less holy. There's something about like the artistic process that I think at first glance and first interaction feels very holy and spiritual. Of the idea of like, oh, I'm getting ideas from my brain that are becoming these works. It's like, okay, well, most of them are crap. So does that mean the crap ones are also holy? And it's like, no. I don't mean to totally demean the artistic process and say like there's no part of it that's deeper or spiritual. Like I do deeply believe that there still is. But that's something I've thought a lot about recently in our work is like, my whole career, I haven't been able to be a collaborator. I've been a one-man band. And so now I get like on my team, like my new job is collaboration, like solely. Like that's really what I do. Writing and collaboration, that's it. Everything like I'm trying to remove all editing from my table and focus on collaboration with people on every stage of the process and the vision for it and the writing. And even that is like, it's so much more fun and interesting to like, it's like we throw different people in a writer's room that you all really trust and you all know. It's like you're throwing different models in a room that all have their different pre-training and data like that they trained off of. And like as a result, you get just such different, interesting combinations of knowledge.
Yeah.
That is really special. And yeah, so we're deep in the writer's room and like four pretty incredible projects. One of which we're working with you guys on, and it's just so fun. And so that's where it really happens. But I constantly have to check my fragility, so to make a bit of a joke there, but like it's a real thing. Especially with artists, it's like in trying to get rid of that and be a champion of the best idea is like the best idea.
We all do, Jason. Like anyone who says, "Oh, I'm not fragile at all," is lying or
Yeah,
just
yeah,
lacks self awareness. Because, like, as I went through life, one of the things that, like, when I was younger, I was a real proselytizer. I was a real, this is the right way. This is the way you got to do
yeah,
it. And as I saw others and myself like stumble, make mistake after mistake after mistake, it really unlocked in me the idea that the average human is quite fragile. The fragility of human nature and of life itself is should not be just dismissed because you're going to make a big mistake if you do that. Another thing that really helped me and was a huge unlock for me was when I started thinking of myself at best as a co-creator.
Hmm.
Like when I wrote my first book and I wrote for my first articles and stuff, like my wife graduated summa cum laude in journalism and she's an amazing editor. And like we had the biggest fight in the world on one of the first pieces I wrote. I said, "Hey, would you take a look at this for me?" And this is back in the early 90s. And so I gave her the paper. I didn't even send it via computer. And like we were going into the city, we're in Greenwich, and we were taking a train into the city that evening. But right before we're getting into the car to drive to the train station, she goes, "Oh yeah, here." And she hands me what I wrote. And it was literally a sea of
Yeah,
red, a
yeah,
sea of red. And I got so angry. Like I just was, I mean, the fight that we had on the train on the way in was like it ruined the night, I would say. And it was me being the asshole. She was right. And
yeah,
like I was so like, this is so precious and this is mine, and you want to change it. And what do you just want to put it in this institutional bullshit voice? And no, she wanted to make it much better.
right.
And like the minute I got over that
Yeah,
was when it really got fun because it was just like, you know what? All ideas are malleable.
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah,
listen to what other people say because guess what? They look at the world differently than I do. And
yeah,
they have insights that I'm just incapable of having. And
100%. And
so like
yeah,
co-create. That what was the unlock for me.
well, like the AI models are just such a wonderful metaphor for the mind, and it's like they're so damn similar. But it's like I'm at like, of course, I'm like imagine if you had an AI model with just basically no data to train on, just like a limited amount of data, super limited. First of all, it wouldn't generate you a good response. And imagine if you only gave it one prompt and expected the perfect response. No, it requires ridiculous amounts of data and ridiculous amounts of iteration. And like there, like that's always how it will be. There's never going to be an AI ever that even if you give it all the data in the world and a single prompt, that will always be a perfect output of what you wanted. Like that's where the iteration comes in. And I think that ability to iterate and go farther and iterate is what makes the really special thing.
Totally. I'm a huge fan of Douglas Adams. I think once you read Adams and understand that he's a philosopher and not just a
Yeah.
sci-fi writer, he
Oh,
makes so much
100%.
more sense. It's
Yeah.
like the minute as you were saying that, I was thinking of, the 42. What's the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Yeah, 42.
I love that book. That book is an incredible one.
Yeah, it's a must read in my thing. Well, I'm getting the hook here. My God, it's 2 o'clock. I can't believe it. We've been talking
This
for
is so
two
fun.
hours. Like when you get in flow and
Yeah.
just get into a great conversation, time just stops, right?
Yes.
And so
So
definitely
well done.
we're gonna do a part two.
Awesome.
But for now, As someone who's heard the podcast in the past, you know what my final question is. I'm making you emperor of the world. You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a re-education camp. You can't, in other words, be an authoritarian. But
Yeah.
what you can do is I'm going to give you this magical microphone, and it is going to incept all 8 billion people, plus or minus 100 million, whenever we happen to be listening to this. You can say two things into it, and everybody on the planet, whenever their next tomorrow is, they're going to wake up and they're going to say, you know what? I just had two of the best ideas ever. And unlike all the other times where I just let them go, I'm going to actually act on these two things. What are you going to incept in the world?
I think I would share my life quote as well as a hmm. I think one would be this idea of, I'm not prepared to give the world emperor probably has a few speechwriters too, so my delivery is not going to be as clean as as it would be with world emperor speechwriters. But the first thing I'd say would be, if you're not already thinking beyond your lifespan, you should really seek to do so. And I think it's the most virtuous thing you can do as a human, is to think, obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, A, outside of yourself, and then B, outside of your lifespan. And how can we give back more to our children, our children's children, and make sure our planet and civilization is still around for them to enjoy and deal with. It's probably one. I think the second thing would be just the same thing that I learned 2 years ago when I started doing S3, and the same thing I just am learning every day, which is that the distance, the gap between genius people that you look up to and you is so much incredibly smaller than you could ever imagine. That would be it. I think I just am confounded every year since, every month, every day since, of how small that gap is, and how it all seems to just come from a place of self-belief, of like, I think that's probably the number one problem with our age, if I had to say, is like that far too many people today couldn't imagine that they could do not even impossible things that other people are doing, let alone impossible things, and that it's all just like comes from a limiting self-belief. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. I might just say that twice, actually. That one, that would probably be it. Yeah.
That's great. That's like William James, whether you he said the most profound thing that he ever discovered in all of his studies. Of course, William James, the father of American pragmatism philosophy, was that if you change your mind, you can literally change your future.
Yeah.
And like that's a very, back to America, right? That's a very American idea. So hopefully we can extend it all the way to Mars and beyond. But in the meantime, huge fan of everything you're doing. Obviously, we'll have you back on for I'll send you the 20 pages on the Tenet deal, and maybe we'll just do one podcast on that.
Well, that or I think next time it should be when our movie comes out, which will be sooner than I think.
There we go. There we go.
I think we could do that and talk about that. That'd be a lot of fun.
That would be enormously fun. Well, Jason, huge fan. I think you are going to achieve your goals, and I'm happy to be one of the members of your group of boosters who want to see you soar.
Well, Jim, thank you again for all the support. I can't thank you enough. I will continue to thank you enough. You're too humble about it. And yeah, I and the team are working incredibly hard to make you guys proud. And thank you again for the support and doing what you do. And I don't know, I'm so excited to listen to more episodes of this show too. Like, I've really enjoyed it. And the conversation was so fun and wide ranging. And yeah, I need more of your reading list too. My God, I wrote down 8 different things that in books you recommended too. And Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.